Hey, before you judge a woman who walks away broken, remember she may return stronger than vengeance itself. So if you like stories where betrayal burns and fate turns the world upside down, subscribe now and stay till the last breath of the story. Because tonight, revenge will wear a smile. The night had no mercy when I stood outside the house that once carried my laughter. The rain was falling like the heavens had chosen my tears to pour. I held my suitcase with trembling hands, the same hands that used to cook for him, that used to touch his face with love, and now they were shaking, not from cold, but from the sound of his voice behind the door shouting for me to leave. I turned once to see him and the woman beside him. She had his arm around her waist and she was smiling like she had already won a war I never fought. He said, "I don't love you anymore," and his words sliced through my chest like glass. I wanted to scream, but silence felt heavier. I walked away because there was nothing left to hold on to except the promise I made to myself that I would never beg for love again. I left with nothing except my name and my father's blood running through my veins, and he never knew that the name he spat on belonged to the daughter of the man who owned the world he worked in. I never told him who my father was. I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my father's power, and I thought he was different. I thought he was the one who saw me, not my last name. But now, standing in the rain, I realized I had given my heart to a stranger. I walked until the streetlights blurred, and every car that passed threw shadows that felt like ghosts chasing me home, but I had no home anymore. I took the train to the city, the same city where my father's empire reached every corner, but I didn't go to him yet. I wanted to heal before facing him, because I left his house years ago wanting to prove I could live without his influence. He had begged me not to marry that man, said he wasn't right for me, said he smelled like hunger for power. But I didn't listen. Love makes fools out of the wise and blind out of the brave. I thought I could change him, but I was the one who changed. Now sitting alone in a small apartment with walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's life, I opened my phone and saw the pictures of my wedding, my white dress, his smile, my father's absence, and I laughed without sound because that silence was louder than any scream I had ever heard. I started working the next morning at a small cafe where no one knew me. I liked being invisible. It made me safe. I poured coffee, smiled at strangers, and tried to forget that I once lived in a mansion filled with lies. Weeks passed and I began to breathe again. The wound in my chest still throbbed, but it was no longer bleeding. Then one afternoon, as I was cleaning tables, I heard a voice I would never forget. His voice, my husband's voice. It echoed from the television mounted above the counter. He was giving a speech about his new promotion at a construction firm. My father's firm. My heart froze. I knew that company logo. I knew that building behind him because my father owned it. And my husband was smiling with pride, saying he had finally earned the trust of his boss. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to laugh at the irony. He had thrown me out and crawled his way into my father's empire, unaware that he was standing on the ground built by the man he betrayed. I decided not to tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted to watch the story unfold. I wanted fate to speak for me. Days turned into weeks and I kept working, living quietly, until one morning my father's secretary called me. She said, "Your father has been asking for you. He misses you." I hesitated but agreed to meet him. The moment I entered his office, the air changed. He stood from his chair, his eyes soft yet sharp. He said, "I've been waiting for the day you'd come back." And I knew he had already heard about what happened, because fathers always know without words. I tried to smile, but tears came instead. He held me and said, "Don't cry. He isn't worth your pain, but I need to tell you something. You must see what has been hidden from you." And he handed me a file. Inside were photos of my husband with his lover, with receipts showing money transfers stolen from company accounts under fake names. My husband had been embezzling from my father's firm. I felt my breath leave my body, betrayal upon betrayal. I asked my father, "Why didn't you stop him?" And he said, because I wanted you to see who he truly is. I wanted him to build his own trap with his own hands, and when it's time, you will decide his fate. Those words stayed in my head like thunder. My father was powerful, cold, and calculating, but for me, he softened always. Yet this time, I saw the steel in his soul. He was planning revenge, but he wanted it to come through me. And deep inside, I wanted it too. Though my heart still ached for the woman I used to be, the one who believed in love. But that woman had died. The night he threw me out, what remained was someone colder, sharper, quieter. I accepted my father's plan to return to the company as his assistant, a role that would place me near my husband without revealing who I really was to the employees. I changed my name, shortened it, and dyed my hair. No one recognized me when I entered the tall glass building where power hummed through every floor. My husband stood there in a crisp suit, his smile fake, his confidence thick as perfume. I stood before him during the meeting, and he didn't even blink as if I were a stranger. Maybe he didn't notice, or maybe he never looked at anyone below him. I kept my head down and spoke little, but every second I watched him, I memorized the cracks in his lies. He had grown bolder, thinking the world was his, thinking my father trusted him, and that arrogance would destroy him. I waited, patient as winter ice, while my father gathered every piece of evidence. Soon the walls he built would close in, but for now, I watched, listened, and learned his downfall. His lover visited sometimes, pretending to deliver documents. Their secret meetings happened right under the eyes of the people he betrayed, but they were blind by his charm. I was the shadow behind him, silent, observing, my pulse steady, my eyes calm. Every night I returned home and wrote in a journal each step of his downfall, because when the time came, I wanted to remember that revenge is not rage. It is art. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the city, I stayed late finishing reports. When he entered the office, alone. He looked tired, but still proud. I kept my face neutral. He said, "You're new here, aren't you?" And I nodded. He smiled the same smile that once made me believe in forever, and he said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Her name was Aria." And my hands froze on the keyboard. He continued, "She was my wife. She left me. Or maybe I left her. Things got complicated." He laughed softly, but there was no guilt, only ego. He said, "She wasn't strong enough for me." And that was when I realized he still didn't know how close his end was. I turned to him slowly and met his eyes, and for a second, something flickered in his gaze, but he dismissed it and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm inside me roared between love and hate, between wanting him destroyed and wanting him to understand what he had done to me. But I knew that monsters don't understand pain. They only respect power. And soon, he would bow to it. Hey, before you judge a woman who walks away broken, remember she may return stronger than vengeance itself. So if you like stories where betrayal burns and fate turns the world upside down, subscribe now and stay till the last breath of the story. Because tonight, revenge will wear a smile. The night had no mercy when I stood outside the house that once carried my laughter. The rain was falling like the heavens had chosen my tears to pour. I held my suitcase with trembling hands, the same hands that used to cook for him, that used to touch his face with love, and now they were shaking, not from cold, but from the sound of his voice behind the door.
The days that followed moved like a slow storm ready to break. I became the invisible pulse of the office, the quiet assistant who carried files and secrets. I watched my husband grow hungrier for power, shaking hands with men whose loyalty could be bought with lies and whiskey. His lover still came sometimes, wrapped in designer dresses, pretending to be a consultant. And every time I saw her, my heart twisted, not with jealousy, but with disbelief at how easily people trade love for lust. I wrote everything down, the late meetings, the hidden accounts, the whispered calls, and my father stayed silent, letting me play the role of the observer, until the day came when he called me to his private room and said, "It's time." He handed me a sealed envelope and told me to deliver it directly to the board of directors without telling anyone what it contained. My heart raced as I walked down the hallway, my heels echoing like the countdown of fate. I entered the boardroom and placed the envelope on the table. The men inside exchanged glances, confused but curious. When they opened it, silence filled the room, because inside were proofs, documents, signatures, everything that tied my husband to the theft of millions from the company, the very empire that fed him. They looked at me, and one of them asked, "Where did this come from?" And I said, "From the truth itself." By the evening, the news spread through the company like wildfire. The mighty manager, the charming husband, the deceiver had been exposed. Security escorted him out, while reporters swarmed outside. I watched from behind the glass, my face calm, my hands steady, my heart both broken and healed. He saw me, finally. Our eyes met through the chaos, his face pale, confusion written all over. He shouted my name, Arya, his voice trembling as realization hit him, and I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The crowd parted like a scene written by destiny, and I said, softly but clearly, "Yes, it's me, your wife, the one you threw out like yesterday's mistake, the daughter of the man who trusted you, the woman whose father is the boss, whose empire you thought you could steal." And for a second, silence ruled the world. The flashlights froze, the reporters gasped, and he fell to his knees begging, but I didn't move. The security took him away while his lover screamed his name, her voice lost in the noise. And that moment felt like the first breath after drowning. I turned away, walked back into the building where everything had started, and my father was waiting in his office. He didn't smile, he just said, "It's over." But I shook my head, because something inside me whispered that it wasn't over yet. Revenge may end on paper, but pain doesn't die that easily. My father offered to send him to prison, to end it legally, but I told him not yet. I wanted him to feel what I felt, not just lose his job, but lose himself. So I asked my father to delay the arrest, to let him wander in fear and ruin, to let the world whisper behind his back for a while. He agreed because he understood the language of justice written in silence. Days passed. He called me dozens of times, left messages, cried, shouted, begged for forgiveness. I listened to none of it, until one night he appeared at my apartment door, drenched in rain. The same rain that once witnessed my fall now watched him shiver outside. He said, "Please let me in, Arya. I have nothing left. I'm sorry. I was blind. I was a fool. I was proud. I didn't know who you really were. But I never stopped loving you." And hearing those words felt like knives twisted into my soul, because love had no meaning left between us. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. I looked at him, broken, dirty, desperate, and I said, "You didn't love me, you loved control. You didn't want a wife, you wanted someone to make you feel powerful. But now look at you, powerless, lost, and small." He fell to his knees again, begging, crying, and for a moment, I almost believed him. But then I remembered the woman in my house, the laughter behind my back, the loneliness he gave me like poison. I closed the door slowly and left him there in the rain. And that night I cried too. Not for him, but for the girl who had once believed in fairy tales. The next morning, the headlines exploded. His scandal, his debts, his lover's betrayal because she had fled the country with the money he had hidden from the company, leaving him with nothing. I watched the world turn on him like vultures on a carcass, and I felt nothing, only silence. He disappeared after that. No one saw him for weeks, until one day a letter arrived, addressed to me. It was from him, written with shaky hands, saying, "I understand now. I destroyed everything I touched. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I loved you once, maybe the only way I knew how. Please don't hate me forever." I folded the letter without reading the rest and placed it in a drawer because forgiveness was not mine to give. It was time's job, and I didn't trust time anymore. My father told me to move on, to start fresh. He said I had done what many couldn't. I had reclaimed my power, but deep inside, I felt empty. Revenge gave me victory, but not peace. I started working full-time, running the same firm that once ruined my marriage. I became sharper, faster, respected, even feared. People whispered my name in the corridors like a storm that had passed, but left its mark. I learned to smile again, but behind every smile was a scar. One night, I attended a charity event held by the company. The room glittered with chandeliers and laughter, and for a moment, I felt like I was breathing again. When suddenly, a man entered quietly, dressed in a simple black suit, his hair shorter, his face tired and eyes haunted. It was him, my husband, standing at the edge of the crowd. He didn't speak, he just watched me from afar. And I froze, because I thought he had vanished forever. Our eyes met across the lights, and something unspoken moved between us. Not love, not hatred, something heavier. He turned and left without a word, and I knew this story wasn't done yet. Something was still waiting to happen. Fate wasn't finished weaving its final act, because revenge ends only when truth reveals its deepest wound, and mine was still open, bleeding in silence.
The night he appeared again, I knew something inside the world had shifted. The wind felt heavier, the city lights dimmer, and the echo of my past louder. I found a letter slipped under my office door, written in the same shaky hand that once promised me forever. It said, "Meet me one last time by the old bridge before midnight." I hesitated, my mind warning me to forget, but my heart, restless and foolish, still whispered, "Go." I drove through the sleeping city, the rain starting again, like it had been waiting for this moment. I reached the bridge where our memories had first been born, the same place where years ago he had knelt to ask for my hand. Now he stood at the railing, soaked and pale, the river beneath roaring like time itself. He turned when he saw me, his eyes hollow, yet somehow peaceful. I stopped a few steps away, the silence between us speaking louder than any confession. He said, "I didn't call you here to beg or to lie. I just wanted to tell you the truth before I disappear forever." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was my wedding ring, the one I had thrown away that night. He said, "I kept it, not because I hoped you'd come back, but because it reminded me of the only thing I ever did right, loving you, even if I destroyed it." I didn't answer. I just stared at him, wondering if this was another trick, but his eyes were empty of pride. He said, "Your father could have ruined me, but he didn't. He spared me because you asked him to, didn't you?" I swallowed hard, because he was right. I had asked my father not to send him to prison. I wanted him broken, but alive. And he said that mercy hurt more than punishment. Every door closed on me.
Every friend vanished. Every hand that once applauded me turned cold. And I finally understood what I had done to you. That pain changed me. It made me see the monster I became. And now there's nothing left for me. I stepped forward and said, "You could start again, build something honest?" But he shook his head. "No, the world won't forgive me, and I can't forgive myself." He smiled faintly and said, "But you should live. You should find peace, because revenge can't hold your heart forever." And then before I could move, he stepped onto the edge. My scream cut through the rain, but he just looked back one last time and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me love, even through hate." And then he was gone, swallowed by the river. The sound of water crashing over stone drowned my cry. I fell to my knees, my body shaking, my heart breaking, all over again. The police searched for hours but never found him, only his coat and the ring floating near the shore. I held that ring in my hand, feeling both grief and release, because the story that began with betrayal ended with forgiveness, written in water. I returned home that night, feeling empty yet lighter, as if the weight of years had been carried away by the river. I stared out the window and whispered, "Goodbye," not to him, but to the part of me that had lived in pain for too long. Days passed. I went back to work and my father watched me with quiet pride. He said, "Sometimes power is not in destroying others, but in surviving them." I smiled softly because now I understood. I dedicated myself to rebuilding, not vengeance, but purpose. I opened a foundation for women abandoned, betrayed, lost, like I once was, giving them shelter, jobs, hope. I called it New Dawn because that was what I needed once and never had. People came from everywhere seeking light, and in helping them, I found mine again. Years went by, the scars softened. I traveled often, standing on stages, telling stories of strength, never revealing that one of them was mine. Until one day, a little girl at an event asked me, "Miss Arya, do you believe people who hurt us can change?" I paused and smiled gently. I said, "Maybe. Not everyone, but some, yes, if their pain becomes their teacher." And as I said those words, I felt the wind shift, a whisper of rain brushing the window. And for a moment I imagined him somewhere far away, alive, perhaps free, perhaps forgiven. I never knew what truly happened to him. The river never gave answers, only silence. But in that silence, I found peace. Because not all endings need to be perfect. Some just need to end quietly. One evening, years later, as I closed my office, a delivery boy handed me a small package. No name, no return address. Inside was an old photo of me on our wedding day, and beneath it, a simple note written in a familiar hand saying, "Still alive, still grateful, still loving you from afar." My breath caught. The world froze, and tears filled my eyes. I looked out at the sunset melting over the city and whispered, "May you finally rest in peace, not in death, but in the heart you once lost." I placed the photo in a frame beside my desk, not as a memory of Cain, but as proof that even broken stories can find grace. Life moved on. I grew stronger, older, wiser. The company thrived, the foundation expanded, and sometimes when rain tapped the window, I remembered the bridge, the river, the man who taught me that revenge can destroy, but forgiveness can rebuild. And in those moments, I smiled, not out of sorrow, but gratitude, because every wound had led me here, standing tall, alive, unafraid. When I walked through the halls of my father's empire, now my own, I felt the ghosts fade, replaced by light, and I whispered to every woman who had ever been betrayed, "Your pain will not define you. Your strength will. And if anyone throws you out for another, remember the universe may still be writing your comeback, because sometimes the end of love is only the beginning of power." So to everyone listening to this story, subscribe. Stay with us for more, because revenge may begin with tears, but it ends with rebirth.